A necklace found at a pawnshop after 28 years unlocks a cold case. The dust motes danced in the slivers of jaundiced light filtering through the grimy pawnshop window. Each one a tiny ghost in a mausoleum of forgotten hope. Detective Miles Corbin felt the familiar ache in his lower back, a dull throb that had become the metronome of his final year on the force. 40 years, and it all came down to this. A clotted shop on a forgotten street, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes, desperation, and cheap air freshener failing to mask the decay. The man behind the counter, a greasy thumbprint of a person named Al, wiped his sweaty palms on a rag that had seen better decades. Like I told the other guy, Al whined, his voice a gravelly scrape, it's just a piece. Came in a box of junk from a storage unit auction. Lady stuff, old. Miles ignored him. His gaze was fixed on the small Ziploc bag on the scratched glass countertop. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowing cotton, lay the turquoise necklace. It wasn't intricate or particularly valuable in a monetary sense. 3 polished stones, the color of a faded robin's egg, veined with threads of black like cracks in a dry riverbed. They were set in a simple, tarnished silver bezel, hanging from a delicate, almost fragile chain. It was the kind of thing a young woman would buy for herself at a street fair. A splash of bohemian color against a sun-kissed throat. He'd seen it 1,000 times. Not the real one. Not until this moment. He'd seen it in blurry photographs, pinned to a corkboard in the cold case unit, a silent testament to a life cut short. A ghost in a plastic bag, Lila Vance, 23 years old. Vanished from the face of the earth on a warm September night in 1996. She'd finished her shift at the university library. Called her mother to say she was heading home, and then, nothing. Her car was found a week later, parked near a hiking trail on the edge of town, keys in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat. Everything was there but her. And the necklace. The one her grandmother had given her. The one she never ever took off. 20-8 years. An entire lifetime. Miles had inherited the case when old Jimmy O'Connell retired. A thick, dusty file filled with dead ends, whispered rumors, and the suffocating weight of failure. It was the case that haunted the department, a permanent stain on their record. Lila Vance, the girl who became a ghost story, whispered to new recruits. "You're sure this is it?" His partner, Detective Isabella Rossi, asked, her voice a low hum beside him. She was young, sharp, her eyes missing the cloudy film of cynicism that had long since settled over Miles's own. She saw a clue, he saw a landmine. "I'm sure," Miles said, his voice rough. He could feel the weight of the years pressing down, the ghost of Lila in the space between them. He looked at Al. "The box it came in, where is it?" Al shrugged, a greasy roll of his shoulders, tossed it. "Just a shoebox full of costume jewelry, old makeup, letters, garbage." Letters. Miles's heart gave a painful lurch. "You threw out letters?" "Hey, I'm running a business here, not a museum," Al grumbled, gesturing to the shelves crammed with orphaned treasures. A dusty saxophone. A stack of chipped porcelain dolls with dead eyes. A collection of power tools engraved with unfamiliar initials. I pulled out the silver, the gold, the few bits that looked like they might be worth $1. The rest is landfill by now. Landfill. Miles closed his eyes for a second, picturing handwritten pages, maybe a diary, turning to pulp under a mountain of refuse, a whole life, dismissed as garbage. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a bitter taste at the back of his throat. He felt a surge of cold fury, the old kind, the kind that had made him a good cop before the years wore him down. The auction, Miles pressed, his voice dangerously quiet. "Where and when?" "County storage, 2 weeks ago. Unit 3B, went delinquent." Al was starting to look nervous, the sweat beading on his upper lip. He licked them, a flicker of a pink tongue. "Look, I didn't do nothing wrong. I bought it legal." "Nobody's saying you did, Al," Rossi said, her tone deceptively calm. The good cop, to Miles's simmering bad one. "We just need to know everything you can remember. Anything about the other items in the box." Al's eyes darted around the shop. as if the answer might be hanging from a tarnished silver locket or hidden inside a broken cuckoo clock. Just junk. Like I said, a tube of lipstick. The color was all wrong, like a weird brown, a little pin, shaped like a bird. A book wuthering. Heights. The cover was falling off. He paused, and the smell, the whole box smelled sweet. Like flowers, but old flowers, the kind you leave on a grave. Potpourri, Lila's mother, in her first interview all those years ago, a hollowed-out woman wrapped in a cable-knit sweater that couldn't stop her shivering, had mentioned the little sachets of lavender and rose potpourri Lila tucked into all her drawers. A small, intimate detail that had never been released to the press. This was it. After 28 years of silence, the ghost was starting to talk. Miles knew what he had to do next. It was the part he dreaded most. More than the paperwork, more than the dead ends, more than the ghosts that whispered to him in the dead of night, he had to call Eleanor Vance. He stepped outside, the cool afternoon air, a relief after the stale confines of the shop. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact. He hadn't spoken to Eleanor in over a year. Their last conversation had been the same as all the others. A polite, heartbreakingly hopeful inquiry from her, and a gentle, professionally vague deflection from him. No, Mrs. Vance, no new leads. But we haven't forgotten her. We never will. It was a lie. The department had forgotten. The world had forgotten. But Miles hadn't. And Eleanor lived in a mausoleum of her own. A pristine house where her daughter's bedroom remained untouched. A shrine to a girl perpetually frozen at 2-3. He pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, as she always did. Hello? Her voice was thinner now, papery with age, but the hope was still there. A tiny flickering flame in the darkness. Mrs. Vance, he began, the words feeling like shards of glass in his mouth. It's Detective Miles Corbin. There was a pause. He could hear her breath catch. Miles has something. Is there news? There might be, he said, choosing his words carefully. This was not a conversation for the phone. This required a face, a human presence to absorb the shockwave. We've found something, an item that we believe belonged to Lila. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched for an eternity. He could picture her in her silent, spotless kitchen, her hand gripping the phone, her knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, a sound so fragile, it threatened to break. The necklace? He closed his eyes. Of course, she knew. What else could it be? Yes. I'll be right there, she said. And the line went dead. She arrived less than 20 minutes later. Pulling up to the curb in a modest sedan, she drove with careful, deliberate precision. Eleanor Vance was a woman sculpted by grief. Her hair, once the same honey blonde as her daughter's, was now a soft, snowy white. The lines on her face were a roadmap of her suffering, etched deep around her eyes and mouth. But her back was straight, her chin held high, a testament to a strength Miles could only marvel at. She was wearing a simple blue dress, the color of a summer sky, and he wondered if she'd chosen it for Lila. Rossi met her at the car, a gentle hand on her elbow. Mrs. Vance, are you sure you're ready for this? Eleanor looked past the young detective, her gaze locking onto Miles. Her eyes were a startlingly pale blue, the color of a winter lake. They held no tears. Not yet. They were clear, focused, and terrifyingly intense. I've been ready for 28 years, detective. Where is it? He led her into the shop. Al, to his credit, had the decency to look ashamed, retreating to a corner, and busying himself with polishing a tarnished silver tray. Miles had placed a chair in front of the counter. He took the Ziploc bag and gently slid the necklace out onto a clean velvet cloth he'd brought from the evidence kit. The 3 turquoise stones seemed to absorb the dim light of the shop, glowing with an inner luminescence. They looked so small, so innocent, a piece of a girl's life, sitting on a counter between a collection of rusty pocket knives and a chipped ceramic Elvis. Eleanor stood over it. Her body rigid. She didn't move, didn't breathe, she just stared. The silence in the shop was absolute, broken only by the hum of the beverage cooler and the frantic beating of Miles's own heart. He saw her hand lift, trembling, her fingers reaching out, hesitating just inches above the stones. She was afraid to touch it, as if the contact would make it real. As if the past 28 years of numb denial would shatter and bleed out all over the dirty glass countertop. Slowly, carefully, she lowered her finger and touched the center stone. A sound tore from her throat. It wasn't a scream or a cry. It was a raw, guttural noise of pure, undiluted agony. The sound of a wound that had never healed being ripped open. Her composure shattered, the carefully constructed dam of her dignity breaking apart. A sob followed, then another, and her body began to shake, her legs giving way. Miles caught her, his arms wrapping around her frail shoulders as she collapsed against him, her face buried in his chest. The grief poured out of her, a tsunami of pain held back for nearly 3 decades. It was a terrible, intimate thing to witness, the complete unraveling of a human soul. He held her, his own eyes burning, the fabric of his jacket growing damp with her tears. He could feel the shudders racking her body, could hear the choked, whispered Leela, my baby girl," repeated over and over like a prayer. Rossi stood frozen, her face pale, her professional detachment stripped away. She was seeing it now, Miles knew. Not the file, not the photographs, but the real, living, breathing cost of their work. The human wreckage left behind. It was a long time before Eleanor's sobs subsided into ragged, hitching breaths. She pulled back, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. But as she looked at him, there was a new light in them. Not hope. Something harder, something fiercer. Who had it? She asked, her voice a raw whisper, but steel-edged. Who brought it here? Miles looked over her head at Al, who was still cowering. In the corner, he gave the pawnbroker a sharp, commanding nod. It was time, Al, Miles said, his voice flat and cold. You have a record of your transactions. State law. Al swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yeah, of course. The storage unit auction, Miles continued. You said the unit was delinquent. There's a name on that account. The person who rented it. The person whose property you bought. Right, Al stammered, fumbling under the counter. He pulled out a thick, grease-stained ledger and a flimsy receipt from the auction house. His hands were shaking as he flipped through the pages. Ah, here it is. Unit 3B. Rented out for damn 30 years. Paid on time, every time, until 6 months ago. Then the payments just stopped. The name? Al. Miles pressed, the air crackling with tension. Eleanor's gaze was fixed on the pawnbroker. Her breath held. Al squinted at the receipt, then at his own ledger, his finger tracing a line. He looked up, his face a mask of confusion and dawning fear. He looked from Miles to Rossi, then back. 2 Miles again, as if he didn't trust what he was seeing. I don't get it, he stammered. This has to be a mistake, a typo or something. What's the name? Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a blade. Al swallowed again, his eyes wide. He looked at Miles, a silent plea in his gaze. Don't make me say it. Miles's expression was granite. Say the name. Al took a shaky breath and read the name from the receipt, the words dropping into the charged silence of the room like stones, into a deep, dark well. The unit was registered to Ear Robert Henderson, since 1994. The air left the room. Miles felt it like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of him. Rossi gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Eleanor just stood there, her face unreadable, but Miles saw the flicker in her eyes. The dawning of a horrific, impossible understanding. Robert Henderson. The name echoed in the silence, a ghost from 28 years ago. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a suspect from the original file. It was the name of the lead detective, who had headed the Leela Vance investigation for the first 10 years. The man who had sat in Eleanor's kitchen, promising her he would find her daughter. The man who had looked her in the eye and sworn he would not rest until he got justice. Detective Sergeant Robert Henderson, retired. The man who had been Miles's first mentor on the force. The cliffhanger wasn't just a name. It was a betrayal that reached back through time, poisoning everything it touched. The box of junk wasn't from a random delinquent unit. It was from a cop, the cop who should have found her, and for 28 years he had held a piece of her. Hidden away in a dark, forgotten box, smelling of dead flowers. The world tilted on its axis. For a moment, Miles Corbin forgot how to breathe. The name Robert Henderson wasn't just a name. It was a foundation stone of his own career, a symbol of old-school, hard-nosed policing. Henderson was the man who had taught him how to read a crime scene, how to talk to grieving families, how to build a case brick by painstaking brick. He was a department legend, a man whose picture still hung in the precinct lobby, a relic from a so-called golden era. And according to a greasy receipt in a grimy pawn shop, he was the keeper of a dead girl's secrets. Eleanor Vance swayed. And this time, it wasn't grief that threatened to buckle her knees, it was rage. A pure, white-hot rage that burned away the tears and hardened her face into a mask of terrible resolve. She looked at Miles, and he saw himself reflected in her eyes, not as a comforter, not as an ally, but as part of the machine that had betrayed her. He wore the same badge Henderson had worn. "That's not possible," Rossi breathed, shaking her head in denial. "Henderson. It has to be a different Robert Henderson. It's a common name." "Is it?" Detective Eleanor's voice was arctic. "How many Robert Hendersons do you know who were police sergeants in 1996 and rented a storage unit 2 years prior, only to let it go delinquent right after Henderson? Henderson had a debilitating stroke. The information hit them like shrapnel. Henderson had suffered a massive stroke 6 months ago. It had left him paralyzed, unable to speak, imprisoned in his own body in a high-end nursing home. The timing was too perfect, too damning. The unpaid bills, the delinquent unit, the auction. It was a chain of events set in motion by a medical catastrophe, a secret kept for 30 years, unearthed by a blood clot in the brain. Miles felt a profound sense of vertigo. He had visited Henderson in that nursing home 3 months ago. He'd sat by the bed, talking about old times, trying to coax a flicker of recognition from the man's vacant eyes. He had seen a pathetic, broken old man, an object of pity. Now, that image was twisting into something monstrous. What had been behind those eyes? What secrets had been locked away behind that slack, paralyzed jaw? Before he could process one betrayal, another one blindsided him. Al, the pawnbroker, was wringing his hands, his face pale with a new kind of fear. "Wait a minute," he squeaked, his voice rising in panic. "The other guy. The one I told you about. The guy who called before you." Miles turned on him. "What other guy?" "The one who called this morning. Right after I asked about the necklace. Described it perfectly. The turquoise, the silver, everything. Said he was a collector, offered me $5,000 for it. Cash, no questions asked. Said he was on his way." Al was sweating profusely now, his eyes darting towards the door, as if he expected a demon to walk through it. "I told him it wasn't for sale. That I had to hold it. Police interest." He got real quiet. Then he hung up. "Did he give you a name?" Rossi demanded. "No name," Al whimpered. "But the voice, I'd know it anywhere. He's a regular, a big shot, comes in sometimes, sells stuff. Family heirlooms, he says. Always pays in cash, always a little too charming." A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled over Miles. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, who Al was talking about. He didn't even have to ask Dot, but Eleanor did. "Who?" she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Al looked at Miles, his expression pleading. Miles gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Spit it out." "Judge Harrison Sterling," Al whispered. "His wife died a few years back. He's been selling off her things." Judge Harrison Sterling. The name hung in the air, thick and poisonous. If Henderson was a foundation stone, Sterling was the whole goddamn courthouse. A revered figure in the city, famous for his tough sentences and his unassailable public integrity. He was a friend of the police department, the keynote speaker at their annual charity gala. He was also, Miles remembered with a sudden, sickening jolt, the prosecuting attorney on a string of high-profile cases Henderson had worked in the early 90s. They were friends, golfing buddies. Their families spent holidays together, and Lila Vance, a bright, bookish 23-year-old girl, had been a paralegal intern at the district attorney's office the summer before she disappeared. She had worked for Harrison Sterling. The whole case, the whole 28 years of cold, dead silence, was a lie. It wasn't a stranger abduction. It wasn't a crime of opportunity on a lonely hiking trail. It was something dark and rotten at the very heart of the city's power structure. The cop, the prosecutor, and the girl. Miles looked at the necklace on the velvet cloth. It was no longer just a piece of jewelry, it was a key. A key that had just unlocked a crypt, and the things crawling out were more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. He thought of Lila, not as the smiling girl in the faded photograph, but as a young woman with a secret basis, a secret that had gotten her killed. Her broken past wasn't just a disappearance. It was an erasure, meticulously executed by the very men sworn to protect her. And there was a hidden witness. Someone had to have seen something. Someone had to have known. In a conspiracy that tight, there was always a weak link, a loose thread. His mind raced back through the dusty files, searching for a name, a face, anyone who didn't fit. He found her almost instantly. A footnote in the original investigation. Another intern at the DA's office, a quiet, nervous girl who had quit her position without explanation 2 weeks before Lila vanished. Her name was Chloe Benson. Henderson had interviewed her once. The notes were brief, dismissive. Subject is overly emotional, unreliable, no useful information. Where was Chloe Benson now? Was she scared, or was she complicit? The pawnshop felt like it was closing in on him, the walls sweating with the city's dirty secrets. He looked at Eleanor Vance, who was no longer crying. Her grief had been calcified into something diamond hard. He looked at Rossi, her youthful idealism shattering in real time, and he thought of the 3 lives at the center of this storm. Their pasts about to be exhumed and put on trial. Lila Vance, the victim. The bright, hopeful young woman whose only mistake was trusting the wrong people. What had she discovered in that courthouse? What terrible secret had she stumbled upon that required her to be silenced so completely? Her past was a ghost story. And Miles now knew the story had been written by monsters. Judge Harrison Sterling, the antagonist. The man with the iron gavel and the perfect public life. His past was a carefully curated fiction, a performance of integrity that Miles now saw as a grotesque mask. What rot lay beneath it? What cruelties had he hidden behind his judicial robes? The call to the pawnshop was an act of arrogant desperation. He thought he could still control the narrative by the silence he'd enforced for so long. And Chloe Benson, the hidden witness. The terrified young intern who had run away. Her past was a question mark, a long, dark silence of fear. For 28 years, she had lived with what she knew. Had she been threatened, bribed, or was her conscience so buried under a mountain of fear that she had become a prisoner of her own silence? Henderson's dismissive note was telling. He hadn't wanted to find information. He had wanted to guarantee there was none. Miles felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. This wasn't a cold case anymore. It was a war. A war against men who had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies and a young woman's bones. And he, a burned-out cop on the verge of retirement, was standing at ground zero. He picked up the Ziploc bag, the turquoise necklace, cool and heavy in his hand. It felt like the pin of a grenade. The nursing home smelled of bleach and regret. Miles walked down the polished corridor, his footsteps echoing in the sterile silence. The place was called Serenity Meadows, a name so cynically dishonest it was almost beautiful. There was no serenity here, only the quiet, humming machinery of managed decay. He stopped outside room 212. A small brass plate read, Robert Henderson. Inside. Henderson was propped up in a mechanized bed, staring at a television playing a game show on mute. His body, once thick and powerful, was a shrunken skeletal thing under a thin white blanket. One side of his face drooped, pulling his mouth into a permanent, lopsided grimace. His eyes, milky with cataracts, were open, but they were vacant, focused on nothing. A thin line of drool trickled from the corner of his paralyzed mouth onto the bib tucked into his collar. The titan of the homicide division, the man who could break a suspect with a single, withering glare, was gone. Only this husk remained. Miles pulled a chair up to the bedside. "Hello, Bob," he said, his voice flat. "It's me, Miles Corbin." There was no response, not a flicker of recognition. Just the rhythmic wheeze of his breathing, and the distant, cheerful jingle of the television. "We found something, Bob," Miles continued, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Something you lost, a turquoise necklace. Belongs to a girl named Leila Vance. You remember her, don't you? Pretty girl, 23 years old. Disappeared on your watch." He watched Henderson's face, searching for any sign, any twitch of a muscle, any spark in the desolate emptiness of his eyes. Nothing. It was like talking to a statue. "You had it for 28 years, Bob. Kept it in a box. With her letters." What was in those letters, Bob? Was it a love affair? Was she writing to Sterling, or was she writing about him? Did she find out something she shouldn't have? Something about you and the good judge? He let the questions hang in the air, sharp and poisonous. He felt a flicker of the old rage, the impotent fury of a young detective watching a powerful man manipulate the system. Henderson had been his mentor. He had looked up to him, trusted him. Now, he saw the man's entire career as a lie, a performance designed to hide the rot at its core. "Your buddy, the judge, he tried to buy it back this morning," Miles said, his voice laced with contempt. "Can you believe the arrogance? After all this time, he still thinks he can just buy his way out of a grave. But he's scared, Bob. You can't talk, but he can, and he's getting sloppy." He stood up, looking down at the broken man in the bed. There was no justice to be had here. No confession, no answers. Just this pathetic, empty shell. The real fight wasn't with this ghost. It was with the one still walking around, cloaked in judicial robes. As he turned to leave, his eyes caught a photograph on the bedside table. It was an old one, faded and curling at the edges. A younger Henderson, beaming, stood with his arm around Harrison Sterling at a police charity barbecue. Both men were holding beers, laughing, the picture of untouchable, masculine camaraderie. In the background, partially obscured by a plume of smoke from the grill, was a young woman with honey blonde hair, turning her head away from the camera. All he could see was the curve of her cheek and, dangling from her neck, 3 small, unmistakable stones of turquoise. The image was a punch to the gut. She was there, in their world. A part of their landscape, not a random victim, but someone who had been right there, in plain sight. Smiling just before the darkness swallowed her whole. The injustice of it was a physical weight, a pressure in his chest that made it hard to breathe. Henderson and Sterling weren't just killers. They were vultures who had feasted on her life and then posed for pictures on her grave. Miles left the nursing home and drove to a part of town he hadn't visited in years. The address for Chloe Benson, the other intern, the unreliable witness, had been pulled from DMV records. She lived in a modest post-war bungalow in a neighborhood of manicured lawns and quiet streets. The kind of place people moved to when they were running from something. A woman with tired eyes and a nervous, bird-like energy answered the door. She was in her late 40s, her hair streaked with gray, her face etched with a permanent, low-grade anxiety. When Miles identified himself, all the color drained from her face. "Chloe Benson?" he asked, though he already knew. She just nodded, her hand clutching the doorframe, as if it were a life raft. "I need to talk to you about your time as an intern at the district attorney's office," he said gently. "I'm looking into a cold case. The disappearance of Leila Vance." The name hit her like a physical blow. She flinched, her eyes darting past him to the empty street, as if expecting to see ghosts materialize on the pavement. I can't," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "I don't know anything. I told the other detective that, years ago." The other detective was Robert Henderson, Miles said, his gaze unwavering. And I don't think you told him everything. I think he made sure you didn't. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. The fear was palpable. A living thing that radiated from her. In waves, you don't understand, she whispered, shaking her head. You can't, they'll ruin me. They'll ruin my family. Who is they, Chloe? Rossi asked, her voice calm and reassuring from beside Miles. Judge Sterling. Chloe choked back a sob, refusing to say the name. Her silence was its own confession. We know he was involved, Miles pressed, keeping his tone even. And we know. Henderson covered it up. We have evidence, Chloe. A necklace, Leela's necklace. Henderson kept it for 28 years. The information seemed to break something inside her. The fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a flicker of something else. Anger, resentment, the bitterness of a secret kept for too long. He promised her, she whispered, her voice cracking. He promised he would leave his wife, he said. He loved her. The story tumbled out of her then, a torrent of words held back for a lifetime. She and Lila had been friends, two ambitious girls navigating the shark-infested waters of the DAS office. Sterling, the charismatic, powerful prosecutor, had taken a special interest in Lila. At first, it was mentoring, extra assignments, praise. Then it became lunches, late nights at the office, gifts. He had seduced her, a master manipulator, preying on a young woman's naivety and ambition. She was so in love, Chloe said, her voice dripping with a mixture of pity and contempt. She actually believed him. She thought they were going to have a life together, but he was just playing with her. It was a game to him, a conquest. The conflict escalated when Lila discovered she was pregnant. She had confronted Sterling, believing he would finally leave his wife and they could be a family. Instead, he had turned on her. He was cruel, Chloe recounted, her body trembling with the memory. He called her a stupid little tramp. He said she was trying to trap him, that he would destroy her if she ever told anyone. He said he would make sure everyone thought she was crazy, that she was a stalker. He would ruin her reputation, her career, her life. Lila had been devastated, humiliated, but the humiliation turned to fear when she realized Sterling wasn't just making idle threats. He started to gaslight her, losing important files she had worked on and blaming her for the mistakes. He would tell her to meet him somewhere and then not show up, later denying the conversation had ever happened. He was isolating her, making her doubt her own sanity. The betrayal was brutal and systematic. The day Chloe quit, she had walked into Sterling's office to drop off a file and found him backing Lila against a wall. His face contorted with rage, his hand gripping her arm. You will learn to be quiet, he'd hissed, his voice low and menacing. You will learn your place. Leela had been crying, her face pale with terror. Chloe had fled, terrified, and never went back. She had buried the secret, convinced herself it was the only way to survive. Sterling was a god in that city. What could a 22-year-old intern do against a god? A few days before she disappeared, Chloe said, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, Leela called me. She sounded different, not scared anymore, she sounded strong. She said, I'm not going to let him erase me, Chloe. I have proof, he can't deny it. He thinks I'm just some stupid girl, but he's wrong. Proof? Miles asked, his heart pounding. What proof? She didn't say, Chloe whispered. She just said she was going to make it right. And then, she was gone. And Detective Henderson came to see me. He was so kind, so fatherly. He told me I was a smart girl, that I had a bright future, and that it would be a shame to get mixed up in something messy. He said Leela was a troubled young woman, that she was unstable. He made me feel like what I saw wasn't real. He made me feel like I was the one who was crazy. He scared me into silence. The conspiracy was laid bare. It wasn't just a cover-up of a murder. It was the systematic destruction of a woman's life, her reputation, her very identity, orchestrated by two powerful men. One had been the abuser, the other, the cleaner. They had worked in tandem, a perfect, monstrous machine of injustice. The fear Chloe had lived with for 28 years was a prison they had built for her. The walls were fear, the bars were shame. Miles looked at this trembling woman, and he didn't see a coward. He saw another victim. He saw a woman who had been systematically terrorized into silence by men who wielded power like a weapon. The escalating conflict hadn't just been against Leela. It had been against anyone who could corroborate her truth. "He's not a god, Chloe," Miles said, his voice quiet but firm. "He's just a man, and he's going to answer for what he did to her, and to you." Leaving Chloe's quiet street, the world felt darker. The colors of the setting sun muted and gray. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. It reached into every corner of the city's power structure. Miles now understood that Lila hadn't just been fighting for her baby, or for her love. She had been fighting for her own existence against men who believed they had the right to erase her. And somewhere, in the 28 years of silence, was the proof she had talked about. A recording, a diary, a letter, something sterling. And Henderson had missed the key to burning their world to the ground. The search was a ghost hunt. Miles and Rossi, armed with a warrant signed by a nervous, sweat-beaded supervising judge who owed Miles a favor, descended on the late Robert Henderson's home. It was a neat brick house on a street of identical neat brick houses, a monument to a life of carefully constructed normalcy. Henderson's wife had passed away 5 years prior, and the house had the feeling of a place frozen in time, thick with dust and the faint, cloying scent of potpourri, same scent Al had described. From the box, it was a punch to the gut, a confirmation that Henderson hadn't just kept a piece of Lila. He had lived, for a time, with a woman who unknowingly shared a preference with his victim. The irony was suffocating. They tore the place apart. They sifted through 30 years of accumulated life tax records, photo albums, cancelled checks, every mundane piece of paper that constituted a man's history. They were looking for a needle in a haystack, a single explosive secret hidden amongst the banal. The attic was an oven, the basement a damp, spider-webbed crypt. They found Henderson's old case files, neatly boxed and labeled. A library of solved crimes that now felt like a grotesque fiction. They found his service revolver, cleaned and oiled, sitting in its holster on his bedside table. They found nothing. The frustration was a living thing, a third person in the room with them. Sterling was still out there, presiding over his courtroom. A man of unimpeachable honor, while they were chasing ghosts in a dead man's house. Every passing hour felt like a victory for him. Another moment he got to breathe free air while Lila lay in some unknown, unmarked grave. The pressure was immense. Eleanor Vance called 3 times a day, her voice no longer pleading, but demanding. The voice of a woman who had waited long enough. Chloe Benson, emboldened by their visit, had started to remember more details than the name of a discreet hotel Sterling used for his trysts. The type of expensive scotch he drank, the way he would hum Wagner under his breath when he thought no one was listening. The details painted a vivid portrait of the monster, but they weren't evidence. They were just colors in a nightmare. The turning point came not from the house, but from the pawn shop. Al called, his voice a panicked squeak. He came in, he whispered into the phone. "Judge Sterling. He was just here. Did you call the uniformed officers we had watching the place?" Miles barked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Talking to him outside now, but that's not it. He didn't come to buy the necklace. He came for something else. He asked me if there was a book in the box. Wuthering Heights," he said. He described the torn cover. He was desperate, detective. "I've never seen a man like that," so unglued. He offered me $10,000 for it. Miles froze, the dust-filled air of Henderson's study suddenly electric. Wuthering Heights. The book Al had mentioned, the one he had dismissed as garbage and thrown in a dumpster that was now part of a landfill. "What did you tell him?" Miles asked, his voice tight. "I told him the truth. That I tossed it. You should have seen his face, detective. It was like I'd shot him. He just stared at me, and all that charm, all that power, it just melted away. He looked like a cornered animal." Miles hung up the phone, his mind racing. Why the book? Why was a tattered old copy of a Gothic romance novel worth $10,000 to a man like Sterling? It wasn't the letters. He and Henderson would have destroyed any incriminating letters immediately. It had to be something inside the book itself. Something Lila had hidden. The proof she had mentioned to Chloe. He looked at Rossi, a wild, desperate idea forming in his mind. The landfill, he said. Rossi stared at him. Miles, no, that was 2 weeks ago. We're talking about 100,000 tons of garbage. It's impossible. Impossible is a dead girl's necklace showing up after 28 years, Miles shot back. Impossible is the lead detective and the city's top prosecutor being in on her murder. We're past impossible, Izzy. We're in miracle territory. The book is the key. I can feel it. The next 3 days were a descent into hell. Miles pulled every string he had, called in every favor, cashed every chip he'd ever earned. He got the city sanitation department to isolate the section of the landfill where the refuse from Al's dumpster would have been dumped. The area was the size of a football field, under a blistering sun, surrounded by the deafening roar of machinery and the stomach-churning stench of decay. A team of 20 officers and sanitation workers began the painstaking, surreal task of excavating 2 weeks' worth of the city's garbage. It was a nightmare. They waded through a sea of filth, their boots sinking into a foul soup of rotting food, soiled diapers, and discarded lives. The smell was biblical. The work was soul-crushing. After 2 days, morale was shot. The cops were muttering, calling him crazy. Rossi was starting to look at him with pity. He was beginning to doubt himself, the hope that had flared in his chest, guttering in the toxic air. On the third afternoon, just as he was about to call it quits, a rookie officer named Miller let out a yell. "Detective, over here." Miles scrambled over a small mountain of trash bags. Miller was holding up a tattered, filth-encrusted book, handling it like it was the Holy Grail. The cover was barely attached, but the embossed title was just visible. Under the grime, Wuthering Heights, a sacred silence fell over the search party. The roar of the machinery seemed to fade away. Miles took the book, his hands trembling. It felt like a miracle. He carefully, reverently, opened it. The pages were stained and warped, but they were intact. Tucked between the pages, near the back, was a small, flat object wrapped in plastic. A microcassettetape. The plot twist was so sharp, so sudden, it almost gave him whiplash. A microcassette. The technology of the era, the perfect hiding place, small enough to be concealed, durable enough to survive. Lila hadn't written down her proof. She had recorded it. They played it back in the sterile, air-conditioned quiet of the forensics lab. The sound was tinny, filled with static, but the voices were clear. The first voice was Lila's, young, hopeful, but with an edge of fear. "Lila, you have to tell her. We can't keep living a lie, Harrison, I can't." Then Sterling's voice. It was smooth, condescending, a silken caress that barely concealed the steel beneath. "Sterling, darling, you're being emotional. We've discussed this. The timing isn't right. My wife, her condition. It's delicate. Leela, her condition. Or your career. I'm pregnant, Harrison. This baby is not delicate. It's real, and it's coming. I went to see a doctor today." There was a long pause. The static on the tape seemed to hiss. When Sterling spoke again, the silk was gone. His voice was cold, flat, and menacing. "Sterling, you did what, you foolish little girl? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've just made a very, very big mistake." Lila, voice trembling but defiant. "No, the mistake was believing you. The mistake was thinking you were a man of honor. But I'm not afraid of you anymore. People should know what you are. They should know the truth." Sterling, a quiet, chilling laugh. "The truth. The truth is what I say it is. You have no idea what I'm capable of. You have no idea what I'll do to protect what's mine." The tape clicked. Off. The silence in the lab was heavier than the stench of the landfill. They had him. It was all there. The affair, the pregnancy, the motive, the threat. It was a confession, straight from the monster's mouth. Lila Vance, from beyond the grave, had just handed them her killer. But the tape wasn't finished. Rossi, her face pale, motioned to the technician to keep it playing. After about 30 seconds of silence and static, another conversation began. This one was between two men. The voices were instantly recognizable. Sterling and Henderson. "You're getting sloppy, Harry, a baby. Jesus Christ. How could you be so careless?" Sterling. "Don't lecture me, Bob. Just fix it. She says she has proof. She's threatening to go public." Henderson. "Proof? What proof? Letters?" Sterling. "I don't know. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. We need to handle this the way we handled the other thing, quietly." Henderson. A heavy sigh. "The hiking trail near Miller's Point. It's remote. No one goes up there after dark. I'll pick her up after her shift. Tell her you want to talk. She'll trust me. I'll tell her I'm mediating, that I'm a friend." Sterling. "And you're sure? No mistakes this time?" Henderson. "Leave it to me. By morning, she'll just be another sad story. A troubled girl who walked away from her life. I'll take care of the car, the purse. I'll build the narrative. You just keep your mouth shut and get your story straight. No one will ever know." The tape ended. The full conspiracy, cold-blooded and meticulously planned, was laid bare. It wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a premeditated execution, planned by a prosecutor and carried out by a cop. They hadn't just covered up a murder, they had conspired to commit it. The stakes had just shifted from a personal tragedy to a scandal that would detonate at the heart of the city's justice system. The tension wasn't just rising, it had reached a screaming, unbearable pitch. Miles held the microcassette in his hand. It was no longer a key, it was a bomb, and he was about to light the fuse. The courtroom was a theater of power, and Judge Harrison Sterling was its king. He sat, elevated, draped in black robes, a living symbol of law and order. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his expression a mask of solemn authority. He was in the middle of sentencing a young man for a minor drug offense, his voice resonating with practiced gravitas. A debt to society, he was saying, a lesson that must be learned. The double doors at the back of the courtroom burst, opened with a loud bang that echoed off the marble walls. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway were Miles, Corbin, and Isabella Rossi. They weren't alone. Flanking them were 4 uniformed officers and, most importantly, the chief of police himself. A man whose face was a thundercloud of grim resolution. In Miles's hand, held up for all to see, was a small, clear evidence bag containing a single microcassette tape. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Sterling froze, his hand hovering in mid-air. The mask of judicial calm cracked, and for a split second, a flicker of pure animal panic showed in his eyes. He saw the tape, and he knew. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, grayish white. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in on him, right here, in the heart of his kingdom. Harrison Sterling, the chief of police, boomed, his voice leaving no room for argument, stepped down from the bench. The command was so audacious, so unprecedented, it stunned the room into absolute silence. The court stenographer's fingers froze over her keys. The young defendant stared, his own legal troubles forgotten in the face of this monumental drama. Sterling did not move. He gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. "Chief, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice a strained, cracking imitation of his usual authority. "This is my courtroom. You have no jurisdiction here. My jurisdiction is the murder of Lila Vance in 1996. The chief shot back, taking a step forward, "and this courtroom is now the scene of an arrest." He nodded to Miles. This was the moment. The cinematic payoff. This wasn't just an arrest, it was an exorcism. It was for Eleanor, for Chloe, and most of all, for Leela. Miles walked down the central aisle, his footsteps, the only sound in the cavernous room. He felt the eyes of everyone on him, the lawyers, the jurors, the spectators. He walked past the bar and approached the bench, the sacred space where Sterling had reigned supreme. He stopped directly below him, forcing the judge to look down. "It's Over, Harry, Miles said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. We know everything. This is an outrage. Sterling sputtered, his composure shattering completely. He was no longer a judge. He was just a cornered, guilty man. A conspiracy. Corbin here has had a vendetta against me for years. The only conspiracy. Your Honor, Rossi's clear voice cut through the air from the center of the room. Was the one you hatched with Detective Sergeant Robert Henderson to murder a 23-year-old girl who was carrying your child? The word murder hung in the air, followed by the bombshell child. A wave of murmurs and shocked whispers swept through the room. News cameras, already present for the sentencing, swiveled towards the bench, their red recording lights blinking. On like predatory eyes, this wasn't just a story anymore. It was a live, breaking scandal. We have the tape, Miles said, holding up the evidence bag. We have you and Henderson planning it all. Every last detail. From her trusting a cop she thought was a friend, to leaving her car at the hiking trail to build your narrative. We have you. He took a small, portable cassette player from his pocket, the kind used for dictation, and placed it on the prosecution's table. He pressed play. The tinny, static-filled sound of Sterling's own voice filled the courtroom. You foolish little girl, do you have any idea what you've done? The truth is what I say it is. You have no idea what I'm capable of. The courtroom listened, transfixed, to the chilling conversation. They heard the threats, they heard the cold, dismissive cruelty. Then came the second part of the recording. The conversation between Sterling and Henderson, the calm, businesslike planning of an execution. Leave it to me, Henderson's voice echoed from the grave. By morning, she'll just be another sad story. When the tape finished, the silence that followed was absolute, profound, and damning. Sterling stood exposed, his crimes laid bare in his own voice, in his own sanctuary. The black robe that had given him so much power now looked like a funeral. Shroud. 2 of the uniformed officers ascended the steps to the bench. They did not ask. They flanked him, their presence an immovable force. One of them produced a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as they snapped shut around the judge's wrists was the loudest sound Miles had ever heard. They led him down from the bench. A fallen king being paraded through the ruins of his castle. His face was a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. As they walked him past the defense table, his eyes met the young man he had been about to sentence. The kid, no older than Lila had been, just stared at him with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. The irony was devastating. The great dispenser of justice was just another criminal. As they reached the back of the courtroom, the doors opened. Again, Eleanor Vance stood there. She had insisted on being present. She wasn't crying. Her face was calm, her pale blue eyes clear and cold as ice. She just stood there, a silent, powerful witness to the downfall of the man who had destroyed her life. Sterling saw her. For a moment, their eyes locked. In his, there was a flash of something, shame, perhaps. Or just the shock of being confronted by the living embodiment of his sin. In hers, there was nothing. No hatred, no forgiveness. Just an ending. She had outlasted him. Her love for her daughter had been stronger than his power, stronger than his secrets, stronger than death itself. She had one. The cameras flashed, a storm of light capturing the moment for eternity. The great Judge Sterling, the icon of justice, being led away in handcuffs, his public execution complete. It wasn't just an arrest. It was a detonation, a scandal that would rock the city to its foundations and expose the rot that had festered. For decades, beneath a veneer of civility, the cinematic payoff was complete, a public shaming so total, so absolute, that it felt like a form of divine, cathartic justice. Miles watched him go, a profound sense of exhaustion and release washing over him. The ghost had been heard, the debt had been paid. The autumn that followed was a season of ghosts. The Sterling trial dominated the news, a public autopsy of a corrupt system. The city watched, mesmerized and horrified, as decades of secrets were exhumed and displayed in the harsh light of a new courtroom, one where Harrison Sterling was not the king, but the defendant. His arrogance had crumbled, replaced by the pathetic, sniveling denials of a guilty man. He was convicted on all charges: murder, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The life sentence was a formality. His life had already ended the moment those handcuffs clicked shut. Miles Corbin didn't attend the trial. He watched it from a distance, a weary spectator to the fire he had started. He put in his retirement papers the day after Sterling's arrest. There were no more ghosts for him to chase. The Lila Vance file, thick with new evidence and a final satisfying conclusion, was closed. His 40 years on the force were over. He spent his first few weeks of freedom in a strange, disorienting limbo. The quiet of his small apartment, once a refuge, now felt cavernous. He'd wake at dawn, his body still wired for a job that was no longer his. He'd walk the city streets, seeing them not as a collection of neighborhoods, but as a map of tragedies, a landscape of memories he was desperate to forget. One crisp November afternoon, he found himself driving with no conscious destination, out towards the edge of town. He ended up at Miller's Point, the place where Henderson had planned to take Leela, the place that had been meant to be her grave. The hiking trail was still there, the entrance marked by a simple wooden sign. It was a beautiful spot, a place of stunning natural vistas and quiet serenity, a place Henderson and Sterling had tried to taint with their darkness. He got out of the car and started to walk. The air was cool and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. The sound of the city faded away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the call of a distant bird. He walked for nearly a mile before he found what he was looking for. It wasn't a formal grave, it couldn't be. After his conviction, Sterling, in a desperate last-ditch attempt at a reduced sentence, had finally confessed to the location of Leila's body. He had led them to a desolate, rocky patch of land miles from the trail, a place no one would ever stumble upon. He and Henderson had buried her there, under a pile of stones, like an animal. But Eleanor Vance had refused to let that be Lila's final resting place. She had Lila's remains cremated. Here, at Miller's Point, the place chosen by her killers, Eleanor had reclaimed the narrative. Under a towering oak tree, overlooking a breathtaking valley, was a simple, granite bench. There was no name on it, no dates. Just a single line of engraved text. It was from Wuthering Heights. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. Eleanor was sitting on the bench, looking out at the valley. She was wrapped in a thick, cable-knit sweater, the same one Miles remembered from her first interview all those years ago. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She smiled, a small, sad, but genuine smile. "Hello, detective," she said, her voice soft. "It's just Miles now, Eleanor," he said. Sitting down beside her, they sat in silence for a long time. The quiet, comfortable, companionable. The view was spectacular. The autumn colors a blaze of orange, red, and gold across the hills. It was peaceful here. "I come here most days," Eleanor said finally. "I know she isn't here, not really, but it feels like she is. That book, it was her favorite. She thought it was the most tragic, romantic story ever written. She saw herself as Catherine, and Sterling as her Heathcliff, a tortured, passionate soul." Eleanor shook her head, a flicker of the old pain in her eyes. She was so young, she didn't understand that some souls are just empty. There's no tragedy in them, just a void. She turned to him, her pale blue eyes searching his face. "Thank you, Miles, for not forgetting her, for giving her back her voice." "I was just doing my job," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "No," she said, her voice firm. "You did more than that. You listened. After all those years, you were the only one who still knew how to listen." He didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He thought about the turquoise necklace, sitting in an evidence locker, a small, silent artifact that had unlocked so much pain and, finally, a measure of peace. He thought about Leela, a girl he'd never met but whose life had become intertwined with his own. Her ghost was finally at rest, and maybe, now, his could be too. he stood up to leave. The sun beginning to dip below the hills, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose. As he turned to go, he saw a small laminated card tucked into the earth at the base of the bench. It was a photograph. Not the smiling, official portrait from the missing person file, but a candid snapshot. In it, a 23-year-old Leela Vance was laughing, her head thrown back, her honey blonde hair catching the sunlight. She was on a beach somewhere, the ocean sparkling behind her. She looked vibrant, joyful, and incandescently alive, and around her neck, a splash of brilliant color against her sun-kissed skin, were 3 polished stones of turquoise. It was a final, haunting reminder of everything that had been lost. Not just a life, but all the laughter, all the joy, all the bright, beautiful moments that should have been. The cost of truth had been immeasurable. But here, on this quiet hill, in this bittersweet aftermath, there was a sense of an ending. A story told, a promise kept. And as Miles walked back to his car, leaving Eleanor alone with her daughter's memory, he felt the weight of the last 28 years finally, gently, begin to lift,